What's up, everybody? The people have spoken. We've responded. Adam Kaufman here, not Brendan Glasheen. Garion, Thorne, Chirag, Hira. It's good to see you guys. How are you?
Great, I guess.
Good,
man.
I suppose.
Great, I suppose. I haven't been in a three-man booth with you two in quite some time.
Well, I think this is what it's all about. This, again, just the people's picks right here, the three of us coming together, talking a little hoops and whatever the heck else comes our way here on the Slate. We thank you all for being here with us. YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, wherever you're finding us. Obviously, get your questions in. Our producer, Eamon, he will seek them out, send them to us, and we will do our best to help you set those lineups, make your bets, whatever it may be, across the association a little bit later on tonight. Fellas, though, I think before we look ahead to what is a very mild three-game slate this evening, we have to look back just a little bit to just the latest, NBA faux on-court crimes that the latest installment here between you had Nick Jokic, the reigning MVP, resident tough guy, and he's not a guy that I would want to upset. And I would think Marcus Morris would maybe, or Markieff Morris rather, would want to think better of it as well, because he took a tough shot to the back there, and then obviously you had to spill it out into the hallway there for the heat and everything else that has come about. Where do we go from here, Chirag?
Suspensions. I'm looking forward to seeing what the suspensions are going to be. Remember, Nikola Jokic played every single game last season, so the Nuggets without Jamal Murray, it's going to be really interesting to see how the rotation shapes up. They've already been dealing with injury issues with the back from Michael Porter Jr. So now this team is just completely going to be decimated if Nikola Jokic is out anywhere from 2 to 5 games. Like that's my biggest question is how much of a suspension, what kind of line does the league set? Because he was not the instigator there. If you look at that replay, there was a chance where Morris could have actually taken out his knee on that collision. So I believe that now we have a scenario where Will Barton is going to be that guy, and he's going to make a great fantasy option as long as Jokic and Porter remain out.
Nugs Heat obviously don't play tonight, so it's not an immediate concern, but obviously just projecting ahead to what's coming up later this week. What are you thinking in terms of a penalty here, Garion?
Yeah, I mean, I would say 2 to 5 games is probably in the realm of what we're going to end up seeing. It's a situation that's interesting, like Chirag was kind of laying out. I mean, I don't want to say what Jokic did was justified. You can't cheap shot someone in the back, but he was cheap shotted in the ribs or the knee, or it could have gone a lot of different ways. And, this is maybe more of like a hockey thing, but there's history with the Morris twins. I don't think the league is going to take this overly lightly. It's going to be a really interesting situation, because I think you could almost try to spin this in a positive sense for the Nuggets if Michael Porter Jr. were actually healthy, and say, okay, maybe this is a 3-game sample where we can just let him run the offense, try to figure out what the heck has been going wrong with this guy so far in 2021. But he's already been ruled out for Wednesday. Back injuries don't just magically go away.
Especially for guys like him.
He also ends up missing this stretch. I mean, it's not going to be great. We're going to be looking at a lot of like, wow, is Bones Highland a really good play tonight? And as fun as that could be, the Nuggets could just be really, really bad. I mean, they were already bottom half of the league in offensive rating with Nikola Jokic playing out of his mind. So this could go from like not great to really ugly very quickly.
Guys, in the spirit, obviously, of Darren Williams and Frank Gore getting ready to get in the ring and get after one another, again, like Jokic, Morris, like neither one of these guys or their families for that matter would I want to run into in a dark alley, because these are, at least tough talkers, and I have to imagine they got the physical strength to back it up. They certainly have the social media energy to back it up. For anyone that didn't see what happened a little bit earlier on today, I mean, you had Marcus Morris, of course, Markieff's twin brother, Marcus Morris Sr., tweeting, "Wait till bro turned his back, shaking my head, SMH. Noted," and then had the emoji of the pen in hand, just keeping track of what's keeping the receipts on what's coming toward the future. And that prompted, this is maybe the best part, that prompted the Jokic brothers, I cannot pronounce their names, I apologize, to open a Twitter account named at Jokic brothers. Very basic. I mean, just screw creativity. Let's get right to it. So the Jokic brothers created a Twitter account, responded directly to Marcus Morris, wrote, "You should leave this the way it is instead of publicly threatening our brother!" ! Your brother made a dirty play first. If you want to make a step further, be sure we will be waiting for you. And then signed it Jokic brothers.
Got to be clean. Got to be thorough.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, who knows which one of them wrote it? It was just, it's the Jokic brothers account. It's from the Jokic brothers. It is endorsed by and approved by the Jokic brothers. Does this, I mean, where does this go? Where's like tough guy social media talk go when it doesn't, like the guys that are going back and forth, it doesn't even involve them anyway?
Nowhere. This never goes anywhere. Ever.
I'm just sad that
Basketball.
the conferences are separated. When's the next time these two teams are going to match up again?
It's soon. It's like November 29th. The reports are that the Jokic brothers have already bought tickets to that game.
All right.
Ready. I'm not even kidding. That there have been reports of this. That they will be in attendance and ready to defend their brother if such an occurrence, if they're needed at that point. Nothing's going to happen. Nothing ever happens. It's the NBA. And honestly, look.
Do we know if Marcus and the Clips have a game
Jokic's
that night? Can he be in the stands too?
Maybe. I don't know. But like, if you're the Heat and you're even contemplating this, don't fight Nikola Jokic or any member of his family. Again, I'm a coward. I haven't been in a fight since like the 3rd grade. But I'll just say this. I've also never been hit by a 350-pound man in the back. Markieff Morris looked like he was dead yesterday. He laid
How much
on the
of that
ground.
was he playing up? That's what I want.
Maybe. But if he reacts in a fight any way that he reacted last night, I would set the line at like minus 300 on the Jokic's.
Might have to hammer that like chalk jewelry.
I was going to say, I mean, at least we know. I can promise you this, viewers, all our friends out there watching, if the DK Sportsbook creates odds for this altercation, we will be here for it. You can bet on that. We'll break it all down. Maybe again, like Williams and Gore, when that rolls around in mid-December, we'll be able to get into that a little bit. Eamon, our producer, it's also 3-on-2, even if the Morris bros are brawlers. It's true. It's not even a fair fight. It's not a fair.
Well, I mean, my impression was Heat culture would then take over. I mean, Udonis Haslem's going to start this game against the Nuggets on the 29th. Like, gotta go back to hockey here. Like, we're putting the bruisers in for the.
That's right out of Goon. How old is Udonis Haslem at this point? Has he?
40,
I mean, he's got to be 40, right?
He's got to be 40.
He's 42 or 43, something like that.
Hanging on, career heat. I love it. All right. If anybody has any questions for us, like I said, relating to the NBA, anything else, football news, we'll be watching for it. Odell Beckham Jr., for anyone that has been just kind of casually paying attention on social media, has cleared waivers. No shock there. There is a report from ESPN, Jordan Schultz, that Odell is eyeing Green Bay. We'll see. That's an interesting situation there with the Packers, obviously, and all things Aaron Rodgers as well. But if anything breaks during this show related to OBJ, we'll be sure to react to that, let you know what's going on as well. The important stuff. But let's get to the association, fellas, with regard to the games tonight. There are 3 of them. The first one begins in a little more than 2 hours. It is Milwaukee at Philadelphia. You got the Bucks, the defending champs, who have not been good this year. 4-6, currently outside the playoffs. I realize we're very early. We're like an 1/8 of the way through the season. So there's a long way to go, or a 1/10 of the way through the season, something like whatever the math is. Chris Middleton, he's out. Illness. Brooke Lopez is out. Back. Continues to provide an increased opportunity, obviously, to Grayson Allen. On the other side for the Sixers, East leading 8-3 at the moment. Joel Embiid, Tobias Harris, Matisse Thybulle, all these guys out with illness. So Andre Drummond, who put up 52 fantasy points against the Knicks last night, another smash spot for him. Garion, let's start with you, and let's start on that Bucks side in particular. What are you watching for here?
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be some value in this game, which on this particular slate is a bit of a blessing. There's not really a lot of sub $4,000 value plays out there. So it's really going to be about maximizing the guys in that $4,000 to $5,000 tier, and you're going to find a lot of them in this contest. Bobby Portis doesn't technically fill that particular criteria. He's been priced out of that after a big performance in his last game on Sunday. He's 5,400, but I could see a lot of people gravitating towards him, and I wouldn't necessarily blame them. Portis is just one of those guys. We talk about, a void on a particular team or in a particular rotation, and someone's got to fill that void and step into those shots and be willing to take some bad shots. Bobby Portis will take any shot you want him to take. He is more than happy to inherit anyone's usage rate, anyone's workload. This is someone who actually so far this season is taking more shots per 100 possessions than Chris Middleton, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Again, Bobby Portis, no conscience. So you could question whether or not his rebounding numbers will be at their ceiling tonight because he's got to go up against someone like Andre Drummond. But I just think Portis is probably going to play somewhere between 28 to 32 minutes. And even at a little over $5,000, I would still consider him a pretty strong value play. And then it's the Giannis question. Is there enough value on this slate for you to be able to build a lineup around Giannis? Because it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that Giannis is in a really good spot tonight. He's averaging 1.7 DraftKings points per minute. He's probably in a situation where he's going to have a pretty large minutes workload. I mean, if this game was last season, we'd be talking about how is Giannis viable because we can't pencil him in for his usual workload. There's blowout potential here. The Bucks are 1-4 in their last 5 games and have a negative net rating for the season as a whole. I know Philadelphia is unrecognizable right now, but I can't sit here and say, oh yeah, the Bucks are going to win this game by 20 points and Giannis only plays 28 minutes. So anytime you're projecting him around 35 minutes, you want to play him. It's just a matter of, is there enough value to actually make that work tonight?
Chirag, you look at some of the good plays in this game. I talked obviously about Grayson Allen. He's in a decent spot. You could look obviously at Giannis, as Garion is talking about. Giannis is Giannis, even at that price, $11,400. He's still a guy that a lot of people are going to be looking to get into their lineups. Obviously, you got Drew Holiday, solid spot. Bobby Portis, as Garion talked about, real solid spot. You could pay down George Hill, $3,600. He's in a good position in terms of points per dollar. Focusing a little bit more though on Portis. I mean, just looking at some of the projections for tonight. And I know people look at different sites, obviously, but where I am looking at the moment, you got Bobby Portis projected for somewhere in the neighborhood of, about 33 points, in that 30 to 35 window. But I think what really stands out is the projected ownership. He is projected to be owned tonight in about 45% of lineups. Does that feel right to you?
Yeah, that feels right because of the 3-game slate. So what I've come to realize on 3-game slates is you shouldn't really take into account ownership as much. It's really what's important is the game stack. So picking which side or which team you're going to game stack a lot of and what the collective ownership of that stack is, because you already know that, okay, we have a safe floor with a player like Portis, who Garion mentioned loves to chuck, but what side of that are you building? Are you adding Giannis to that? Are you adding George Hill to that? Or are you looking to the other side where Philly has Drummond, who could be a potentially popular play coming off 50 fantasy point performance and his salary spiking up over 7,000. But what I've noticed in these 3-game slates is, where do you game stack? And that's kind of where how the ownership should be kind of dictated. It's not really a big deal when you have a guy like this. Basically, I would consider him a free space at this point. And if you want to be different, it's the different construction roster builds.
Garion, when you're thinking about, I think Chirag brought up a good point. When it is just a 3-game slate, obviously a lot of the time we talk about, larger GPPs and differentiation, setting yourself apart, trying to, be a devil's advocate in some ways with respect to some plays. But when it's such a small slate, does part of you sort of approach it like a cash game where you're just saying, you know what, like, I just got to make the best lineup possible. There's going to be a lot of overlap. There's going to be a lot of redundancy. I don't care. Maybe it's one guy in my whole lineup that sets me apart from somebody else, but it's just ownership is not a concern for me tonight.
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously a drastically different approach than you would have on a 7 or 8 game slate or like tomorrow's 13-game slate. And especially the way this particular slate sets up, there's just not a lot of huge injury news in the other two games. And it's just one of those slates where we know where people are going to be hunting for value. The entire Philadelphia lineup are the value plays. So that's even just another level of differentiation out the window, unless something changes. I mean, there's a chance that we get some news from the Hawks that DeAndre Hunter is not going to play in this game, that Bojan Bogdanovic is not going to play in this game. If that were to happen, that does open up the, Kevin Huerters and the Cam Reddishes of the world. And maybe that starts differentiating things a little bit. But I think tonight it's actually kind of interesting in the sense that the differentiation might actually come at the top, not so much at the bottom. I think it's going to be about maximizing the 3 or 4 value plays that everyone's going to utilize and putting them with the right combination of star players. Because on a slate like this, you've got a chance to maybe get some differentiation with someone like Damian Lillard, who finally had a very good game. But I think most people are gravitating towards Giannis and Paul George and Donovan Mitchell, and justifiably so. Those guys just have much, much more secure floors right now to go along with their massive ceilings. But I think that's maybe what I'm looking at, is throwing around different combinations of these star players with some of this value that I just know is going to be chalky, because it's really the only way anyone's going to save some money tonight. Like, I do like a guy like Robert Covington as a nice value play at 4,300. But again, most of that value is going to be coming from Korkmaz and Maxey and Shake and just the Philly guys who are probably going to end up playing like 37 minutes apiece. So trying to find some variance at the top maybe is the way to go.
Chirag, Garion, as we go to the Sixers side of things, mentioned obviously a couple of these names already, but whether it's Korkmaz, obviously is in a great spot. Shake Milton, you can certainly make a case for. Danny Green is in a really solid spot, and he's a pay down option at $4,200 here on DraftKings. But to me, and I mentioned him before, and we'll show you his stats, like Andre Drummond to me, with no Embiid, with no Brook Lopez on the other side. Like, you talk about free spots with Bobby Portis. To me, the free spot is Andre Drummond tonight. That's a guy, and I can look at his projected ownership, but that's a guy you have to sort of, it's like Enes Kanter in Portland last year, right? You have to throw out in your mind what kind of basketball player they are and just look at them as a fantasy commodity. And Andre Drummond, regardless of what you may think of him as a basketball player at this stage and the way the game is played now, dude still puts up numbers, still gets his double doubles, still, comes up with blocks, protects the rim, all that. And just, he will put up some big totals. You can look at it. 52 fantasy points last night. We talked about it. He's got a 57 in there earlier this year as well. He was doing this stuff all the time last year when he didn't have a Joel Embiid. What's your expectation for him tonight?
I mean, both starts over 50 fantasy points. That's kind of the starting point there. But with it being 7,700, you kind of have to make a decision on if you're going to play him. Garion brought up a lot of good points in the way to differentiate your lineup at the top. If you're spending 7,700 for a guy like Drummond, and his ownership is likely to be in that 30 to 50% range as well.
I just looked. His ownership projection is damn near 60.
Yeah, exactly. Sense. So if you're spending 7,700 for a 60% player, you're giving a chance to that 40% of the field to say, all right, if he doesn't score over 50 fantasy points tonight, like that might be a bust actually. Mm-hmm. If he just gets to 40, mm-hmm. like that might be a situation where, and the thing that really is to point out is in that first start, his fantasy performance was boosted by 5 steals last night against the Knicks, 25 rebounds. Yeah, Brook Lopez is not in there, but are these numbers that you can accurately project out, 25 rebounds or 5 steals? Those are two numbers that you really cannot say, oh, I feel confident that I'm going to go to the DraftKings Sportsbook and take the over on any of these numbers. Those are high variant numbers. So when at 7,700, sure, everybody's going to play him. But if you go with Giannis at center and then take all these cheap guys, then you have an option for Donovan Mitchell, Trae Young, Paul George, Damian Lillard. You can even take 2 or 3 of these studs at the top and differentiate that way. And these players, when you're spending 9,000, 10,000 for a player, he's going to get that 50 or 60 point upside. And even the total in that Utah game is higher than this Milwaukee Philly game. The total in the Clippers in Portland is higher than the Milwaukee Philly game. So there's a chance for extra output here in these contests, and just locking in Drummond. There's something to be said if you're playing for tournament and you're looking to differentiate yourself.
And I think
So,
too, like how
please,
sorry
yep.
to cut you off, Koff, but like, would it shock anybody if at 7:52 we're reading Twitter and everyone's mad because Andre Drummond's already picked up his second foul 3 minutes into the first quarter? Like, you look at that box score. I know everyone's looking at the last game and like their jaws dropping. I also see 5 personal fouls in 14 minutes against the Bulls when Embiid was actually playing. Like, Giannis is on the other side of this court and is going to be starting at center. I could really see a scenario where he gets into foul trouble. I mean, maybe the play in tournaments, obviously not in a cash game, but maybe you look at Reed and say, I know this guy only played 4 minutes last night, but he almost, like Chirag was saying, this is a slate of this size is more about game stacks. And really, a slate of this size, you almost have to start letting some like showdown principles kind of influence your decisions. And the big rule of showdown is pick a narrative and build around that narrative. So if you're someone who's fading not Joel Embiid, if you're someone who's fading Andre Drummond, the reason you're probably doing it is because something has gone wrong. He's in foul trouble. He leaves with an injury, et cetera, and he doesn't play the allotment of minutes we think he's going to play. In that scenario, Reed's the guy who's going to reap the benefit of that. So I would even say if you're someone who's fading Drummond, you might as well put Reed into a lineup, because if it hits, both of those things are pretty correlated.
Gary, I know Chirag talked about the game totals are higher in both the other games, and we'll get to the DK Sportsbook side of things in a moment, but with respect to this game, just based on pricing, opportunity, some of the stuff that we've already outlined, do you see this as being a popular game stack tonight?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, this is the value. This is where you're finding the cheap options. I mean, we can run through it. There's some guys to like in these other games. It's just harder to really, it's not even just that they're not as enticing as some of these Philadelphia players. It's that literally the 76ers essentially ran a 7-man rotation last night out of necessity. And we don't know if Seth Curry is going to play or not tonight. He's questionable as of right now. It's really the key injury news we have on this slate. But if Curry doesn't play, you already had 4 different players on the first leg of a back-to-back play 38 plus minutes last night in that game against the Knicks. It's not just that these guys are value plays and they might sneak onto the court for 20, 25 minutes. No, they might play 40 minutes, which is kind of unheard of. So when I'm looking at similar price points between someone like Korkmaz and Terrence Mann, I like Terrence Mann. Terrence Mann's played over 30 minutes in each of his past 4 games. That's not 40 minutes. Like, there's just such a disparity between the value plays in the other spots. So yeah, everyone's going to be all over this game because they kind of have to be. That's where the value is, aside from Covington. Mann, Batum is in a nice spot and he's been playing pretty well. But again, these are guys who are not $4,000. These are guys that are $5,000. So at that point, if those are your value plays, you're only looking at 1 stud because that's really all you can fit. So if you want a 2 stud, even a 3 stud lineup, you have to mine this 76ers team. So that's why they're just going to be as popular as they are.
I'm the DK Sportsbook here, Chirag. You've got Sixers at home. They're 6.5 point dogs. And of course, the game total, as mentioned earlier, 215.5 here as things stand right now for this one. We'll see if anything changes, but not too many questions going into this one with respect to the roster. Obviously, as mentioned, the Sixers are certainly a better team, even though they are shorthanded right now. So anything stand out to you on the DraftKings Sportsbook in terms of a bet you like for this game?
I honestly think that this game sets up better as maybe a same game parlay. If we look at it from a perspective of just where we can take bets, the player props side for the Sixers are not as kind of full because of that Curry situation. All you have from the Sixers side is right now Danny Green, Andre Drummond, and Korkmaz. Everything else, and Tyrese Maxey as well. but you have all these guys that are setting up where question marks. So I would rather look at it maybe as the same game parlay. I feel that the Bucks take care of it just because on the second night of a back-to-back short rotation, I think that we have a chance where we can take the money line with Milwaukee, then go with looking at a different scenario of other player props. So top point scorer could be Giannis, or do we want to look at a player prop of over rebounds for maybe Andre Drummond? If you're looking at his lowest number is at 12.5. So when I'm building these same game parlays, I actually like to look at where the line is set currently and then try to find some value in the alt lines. So that's how I've tried to build out successful same game parlays, is by taking numbers that are lower than the projected line, because then I don't have to go as far. Yeah, you don't get as good of juicy of odds, but when you're putting a same game parlay together, you're saying if A happens and B happens, try to build that narrative. So if we want to say, hey, Drummond has a double-double tonight or something like that. But I really like Bobby Portis points. So if you look at Bobby Portis points, 12.5. If you put Milwaukee Bucks plus Bobby Portis 12.5, you get plus 105 on those odds. So I get a nice little plus money bet, and that's kind of a scenario that sets up nicely for me.
Garion, same approach for you?
Yeah, I mean, I love what Chirag was talking about. I'm far more simplistic on this game. I just like the under. I think you've got a Philadelphia team that, yes, somehow is currently leading the league in offensive rating, but they play at the slowest pace of any team in the NBA by a pretty wide margin. And you could say a lot of that is how they game plan around Joel Embiid, who is, kind of a lumbering center at this point. But Andre Drummond's the same dude. They're going to play the exact same way with Drummond on the floor, and they're going to love to play at that slow pace, especially against a Milwaukee team that just has more ammunition than them tonight. I think they've got to limit possessions. They've got to slow this game down. I just don't know how they score. And even the Bucks have been pretty underwhelming as an offensive team so far this season too. So in general, I think we're at, as of Sunday, this might have changed yesterday, but as of Sunday, it's like 65% of the games we're hitting to the under anyway. Now, I'm sure the lines have been adjusted a little bit as we've gone along so far this season, but at this point, if I have any inclination at first glance to take the under, I don't have to convince myself all that much to just blindly take the under. So tonight, tired legs, short rotation, and just slow pace. I think this game does not even come close to the total.
If you add that under in there, if you add that under into the same game parlay, that actually boosts it to plus 300. So I like that call a lot.
There we go.
You guys have any other thoughts? Anything else you want to get to with that game before we move on to the next one, the middle game of the night?
Didn't realize we're going to analyze it this much, honestly.
Yeah. I will say,
isn't that good? We're giving the people what they need.
It's an important game tonight. We didn't really.
And look, there are only 3.
I think Drew Holiday is actually too cheap on this slate. If we kind of just play the projection game, he went from not starting, playing 20 minutes in his first game on Friday, to starting, playing 30 minutes in his second game on Sunday. I think he's probably looking at somewhere between 33 to 35 minutes tonight. His usage rate since coming back without Chris Middleton has been about 28%. I just think he's more than a $6,400 player. He should usually be hovering around $7,500 to $8,000. So you're saving about $1,000 tonight with someone like Drew Holiday.
Well, if you thought that was deep, get ready for Atlanta, Utah, 9:00 tonight, Eastern time. Of course, that one's about 3.5 hours away at this point in time. And you have got the Hawks. They're terrible, 1-6, 4 straight losses. The Jazz, perfect 3-0 at home, although they have dropped their last 2 since the 7-1 start. Mike Conley, as things stand, we expect him to play. He's probable with that knee injury, at least at last look. Utah won the last matchup. It was only Thursday. It was very recent, 116-98. Jordan Clarkson, 30 points. That's real points. Trae Young had 21, so we'll look into some of the fantasy options also. But just overarching thoughts here, Garion, going into this game.
Yeah. Again, the big news for this one would just be watching that Hawks injury report and seeing what happens with Bogdanovich and with Hunter. I mean, if there's been a narrative about the Hawks so far this season, aside from the fact they cannot defend, despite having a bunch of really, really great defensive athletes on the wing, it's that they've just got not enough minutes to go around for the caliber of players they have coming off their bench. This is a team that's when they're healthy, arguably like 12 guys deep. And that's led to someone like $100 million Kevin Herter not really playing all that many minutes. So if those two guys are out tonight, that really just does simplify things. And it, again, gives us non-Philadelphia value plays, which would really be nice. So that's kind of the thing to watch out for here. I would say too, just Donovan Mitchell's been kind of going absolutely insane his past 5 games. We always talk about how his ceiling is at its best when Mike Conley is not on the court, and that's true. But his usage rate the past 5 games is 40.4%. He's taken 82 shots in his last 3 games. I think he's just reached the point where he doesn't care. So he's just going to make shots and take shots, and Atlanta's defense is bad. So I think this does set up as a pretty nice matchup for Donovan Mitchell, who I would say is maybe my favorite dollar for dollar play on the slate tonight.
Chirag, we'll talk more about, both the teams, obviously. We'll go to Utah in a moment, but just for Atlanta, since it's the road team, what the heck, we'll start with the Hawks. Gary was talking dollar for dollar. I just don't like, if there's anybody, and I just brought him up on my screen, we'll show him to the people as well. Danilo Gallinari. That's the only fantasy option that I would be even considering on that side tonight. There's just no one that really jumps out at me at all. He's in a good spot for value, $3,400 based on what we know right now. I know he's not projected for a huge number, maybe somewhere in the vicinity of 20 fantasy points, something like that. He's not going to be the chalkiest of the chalky either, but I just, normally we'd be looking at Trae Young and guys like that. I don't see it tonight based on everything else we have available to us.
Yeah, but the biggest one to consider is Kevin Herter at 3,500. If Hunter and Bogdanovich do end up sitting, that he can have a scenario where we have Herter playing over 30 minutes. He started against Detroit a couple weeks ago, scored 23 fantasy points in 27 minutes. So I think he makes a lot of sense at 3,500. And you have to keep in mind, this Atlanta team played last night in Oakland. Was it Oakland? Oh, it's in Bay now, San Francisco. It's in San Francisco. And then they traveled to Utah. So that's another scenario where we have a team playing on the second level of back-to-back, and we can see where Herter steps up. And at 3,500, you're not risking very much playing him, whereas everybody's going to be looking at that value. And if he ends up starting or playing in this game ending up being a blowout, you have a chance for him to score 30 fantasy points.
I'm looking at Utah here too, Garion, and I just nothing I really like. I'm much more interested in the first game we talked about and some of the plays in the next game that we will talk about. This game is kind of a wasteland for me fantasy wise.
I mean, again, I think it's just, you've got I don't even want to call it a 2-pronged offensive attack, because Gobert is a pretty low usage offensive player, but his dominance of the glass is well established at this point. So I would say, again, I really like Donovan Mitchell. I just think this does have the potential to be a very high scoring game, just because the Hawks have not defended it. I mean, even a slightly below average level so far this season. I believe they have the 4th lowest defensive rating in all of basketball. So I like Mitchell a lot. If you can afford Gobert, go for. I actually think Gobert could be an interesting play just because of where he's sitting on the pricing list. Like, he's not right next to Drummond, but essentially you're going to have everyone using Andre Drummond. And if people have Drummond in a lineup, very rarely do you have the room for 2 only center positional eligibility players, because, you want to use that utility spot. You maybe want to keep it open for a late swap, et cetera, et cetera. People just aren't going to be using Gobert if that many people are using Drummond. So does Gobert hit his ceiling tonight? It's possible. I mean, you look at that last game against Orlando, Clint Capella is a guy who commands the presence of Rudy Gobert. Like, I could see him playing 34, 36, 37 minutes in this game. So as a variance play, again, this is sort of what I was talking about before, where I don't think you're going to find that much variance in the values, but you're going to find them up in the $7,000, $8,000, and $9,000 tiers. And Gobert is a very good example of that.
Chirag, do you like the Gobert pivot off of Drummond?
It makes sense, but I would rather maybe look at spending up for Giannis. If I'm going to spend up for another center, or if I'm considering Drummond, I would rather go to Giannis and just go all the way up.
Anyone else in this game then that you feel compelled to roster?
Not really. I mean, that Jordan Clarkson outburst was an outlier in a sense. We've noticed that since that game when he went off against Atlanta.
Yeah, not great. About 25 total fantasy points.
Yeah, exactly. And he's a high variance guy coming off the bench, and it's going to take whatever. There are times where he's a spark plug and there are times where he's a dud. And that's why they also have Jingling Joe coming off the bench. And I just believe that there's a chance where, yes, Clarkson can have a great performance, but at 5,200, you have to look at other options that are in this slate, and in that same price range. Even if we look at 5,500 on the entire slate, Bobby Portis jumps off, Korkmaz jumps off. Norman Powell's been playing really well. Yeah, he didn't have a great game against the Lakers, but that was kind of a blowout. The Lakers kind of stunk it up, but he's been playing extremely well too. And then Gary mentioned Terrence Mann, who's been stepping it up as well. So I just think that there's too many options in this range to just say, okay, I'm going to go with a high variance guy in Clarkson on a short slate.
Although I guess, Gary, and I'll say this, it's not that I think Jordan Clarkson is a safe play, because he's not. I mean, we've learned that, you'll get the Jordan Clarkson snowflakes for sure, maybe more often this year than you'll get the fire emoji and everything when you're checking your lineups, but he is at least a guy who gets his opportunity. You look at, again, the game log, we're looking at it right now. 2 of 13 last game, and he still went for 18 fantasy points in 28 minutes. 3 of 9 before that. Again, the game against Atlanta where he did show out, 10 of 19. Before that, 1 of 13, 6 of 17, 5 of 19. List goes on. Before that, he was pretty good. He was consistently in the mid to high 20s. But over this last stretch here, and again, people could see what I'm talking about, he's not been particularly good with regard to just making his shots. When the shots are there, when they're falling, he turns in, above average fantasy performances for what you're expecting from him.
I mean, the issue with Clarkson, and again, the important thing that we haven't touched on yet is the last time these two teams played, the 30-point Jordan Clarkson game, Donovan Mitchell was out, which is why he had that huge game. And he's just someone who doesn't contribute in any other secondary statistics. If he's not scoring 20 points, he's just not going to be a value. I mean, I sort of feel a similar way about Norman Powell, a little bit less just because I think his minutes are more concrete, but you've just got a class of player, an archetype of player that are so reliant on the singular skill that they have. And Clarkson's just not been shooting all that well the past 2 weeks. So if he can't do the one thing that's the only thing that actually supplies him with fantasy value, I can't say I trust him, because again, as Chirag outlined, there's really no shortage of viable players in that 5K tier. That's not the issue on this slate. The issue is once you get below that 5K, that's where things get dicey.
DK Sportsbook, guys, is we haven't really touched on this game in that regard, and then we'll move on to our last game of the night. But Atlanta, Utah, you got Jazz favored by 8 at home, where again they've been solid, obviously, and 222.5. That's the total for this one. So it's about 7-8 points more than that last game that we were talking about, even though the more, the clearer fantasy options came from that previous game. From a betting standpoint, what jumps out at you here, Garion?
I would just say that I'm taking the Jazz with the points. It's a big number. It's a bigger number than I would have expected the Hawks to be laying on the road at this point in the season. But right now, the road home splits for these two teams are just so drastic. The Hawks have been anemic away from Atlanta, and we only have a 3-game sample with the Jazz, but we really have like a 4-year sample of the Jazz just being one of the best home teams in all of basketball. And so far this season, they are outscoring opponents by 13.3 points per 100 possessions when they are playing in Utah. They just look really good. And while I, in a weird way, almost think that the Hawks rotations become simplified if those two players, who are very good players in DeAndre Hunter and Bogdanovich, don't play, that could actually help the Hawks in a weird way. If we're looking at a shorthanded Hawks team against a full strength Jazz team in Utah, I'm willing to lay those points.
Chirag, you thinking parlay again, or you want to, maybe go to the lines?
I mean, it's basically wait until the news breaks, jump on the line. If you take a same game parlay, you think the Jazz are going to pick this game up, you can either take an alt spread and say, okay, hey, let's go -5.5, make it a little bit closer and then take either maybe Donovan Mitchell's points or go with Kevin Herter. His number is a low 7.5. If Hunter and Bogdanovich are out, you just throw that in there. That's plus 230 if you take Mitchell, Herter, and the Jazz minus 5.5.
Very good. All right, let's go to our next game here, fellas. That is Portland at the Clippers. So another Morris to talk about tonight, and that's a 10 p.m. game. So coming up in about 4 hours here. The Blazers, they've been bad on the road, winless as a matter of fact, 0-4, 2 straight wins overall. Clippers, 4 straight wins, so something's got to give. One of these teams is going to fall. Marcus Morris, he's not going to play, though. So the knee injury, expanded role for Luke Kennard, Terrence Mann. Garion talked about Mann earlier. Third meeting of the season. These teams split their first 2, both those games last month. So Chirag, before we get into the fantasy plays, the sports betting plays, all of it, what are you looking for from what projects to be another high-scoring game?
I mean, you have to consider how well Reggie Jackson has been playing. His salary is up at $6,300, but over the last 3 games, he scored over 30 fantasy points. The minutes have been somewhat secure, even over the last, 3, 6, 7 games. There's only been 1 game in this entire season, which one was against Portland, in which he didn't play over 30 minutes. So Reggie Jackson, he came back to this team because they believed in him in the offseason, and he's been kind of their lightning bolt. And the way that he's been playing lately has really picked up the pace of their team. So I think he's a big factor in this game, and how much he has to defend against Damian Lillard or CJ McCollum will make a difference. But I think Reggie Jackson's a big factor in this matchup.
Garion, I don't love Damian Lillard here in this one. I know we talked about him earlier and obviously what the guy is capable of, though we haven't seen much of it this year. But, Dame time can always show up on the clock. I don't love him tonight. Who I do love, CJ McCollum, I think is a great play tonight. It's $7,200. I think Anthony Simons, people have been asking about him in the chat, $3,800. That's another great play. Those are certainly the 2 best on the Portland side in my eyes. Is there anyone you like better, though?
Well, I mentioned Covington. He's just kind of finally found his role again in Portland. The last 3 games, he's 11 for 20 from 3-point range. When he's hitting his 3-point shot, he's staying on the court. When he stays on the court, he's just someone who picks up rebounds and steals. That's been his jam for the last decade now. So he's probably not someone who's going to hit like 8x, 9x value, but I think you can kind of pencil Robert Covington in for 5x, 6x, maybe 7x value tonight, which again, anybody under $4,000 who I can consider viable is someone who's probably going to need a lot of exposure tonight. Simons is interesting. He again falls into that bucket of someone who doesn't do literally anything on a box score aside from score. So you're going to need him to get 15, 16, 17 points if he's going to have an actual impact tonight in a tournament. That's not to say I don't like him. I think this game could definitely end up being high scoring. I mean, any game the Blazers end up playing in could be a track meet on any given night. But I will double back to the Dame Lillard take. And look, this is lazy analysis. I'm not gonna say that I'm reinventing the wheel here, but I just feel like no one's really gravitating towards Lillard tonight. And it's a 3-game slate.
Mm-hmm.
There are not that many superstars on this particular slate, especially considering that Joel Embiid is not playing. However, and justifiably so, Paul George getting a lot of attention. And look, this is someone who's 4th in the NBA in usage rate, 5th in steal rate right now. Paul George touches every category every single night. His shots are guaranteed. Everyone's going to Giannis if they've got this money. And I get that too. Giannis is an absolute stud. As I mentioned, 1.7 DraftKings points per minute so far this season. That is among the league leaders. But Lillard at 9,200. I mean, last season, if we had ever saw Lillard below 10K, we would have thought the algorithm was broken. Like it's just an automatic lock. And we saw signs of life in his last game against the Lakers, 6 for 14 from 3-point range, 25 points. I know that Pacers game looms pretty large in a lot of people's minds, but Lillard can just flick that switch. Like tonight could just be the night where he's got 55 points and all of a sudden Lillard's back. And if his ownership, I mean, you can check your site, Kauf, and maybe let me know how far off I am right now, but I'm thinking he's somewhere between like 20 to 25% on a slate where Andre Drummond could be 60%. Like I'm going to have a couple Damian Lillard lineups just because if he goes off tonight and I don't have a Damian Lillard lineup, I'm going to be really mad because it just feels like the night where if not enough people are on this guy, you just automatically say, okay, I got to make 1 or 2 Lillard lineups just in case.
I'll look it up while we're talking here. Lillard, though, Chirag, obviously I want your take on him because he's not a cheap guy. He's an expensive one that a lot of people will be looking to fade. He's not going to be highly owned. I'll find the number here, but the fact that he's gone this far into the season, hasn't even sniffed 50 fantasy points yet, just blows my mind.
And that's the reason why you have to consider him on the slate this size. It just makes a lot of sense. And honestly, you can fit him in there. It's not like it's impossible. If you go Giannis and Damian Lillard, it's possible to fit him in there. But if you go with Giannis, Lillard, and Mitchell, then okay, it's a little bit more difficult. But you have a scenario where Drummond can even fit in a lineup with Giannis and Lillard. So I just think that there's just a lot of value in this slate, and you have to keep in mind. Gary mentioned Covington. Covington is going to play a lot of minutes tonight, I believe, because of the Paul George factor. You need a guy that has that length and is going to be able to stay on Paul George. So I just feel that Covington's really solid as well. And there's just so much value on the slate that you can literally just line them up and have a lineup with Giannis and Lillard and still get Drew Holiday in there if you want it. Korkmaz is easy to fit. Bobby Portis is easy to fit with them. So there's just too many value options. And if we get this Bogdanovich and Hunter News and Herder ends up being a value as well. There's just so many cheap options. And I honestly don't even mind going with Herder just to fill it in, because you're looking at maybe like a Larry Nance if you're looking for cheap guys all the way down in there and jamming in the studs. So I just think that there's just too many good options on the slate, and it makes sense to go with Lillard because the type of floor that he has. That's what's important on a slate like this. Maybe you don't need the full ceiling, but you're going to get those 40 fantasy points. And if he ends up being boom over the top scoring that 50, then now you're running away with the pack. And then you have another scenario where that person that has the Drummond probably doesn't have that Lillard in there as well. And now you're passing them because Drummond ended up scoring 35 fantasy points and Lillard's over 50.
So most popular plays tonight, ownership-wise, projected ownership, based on what I'm seeing right now. Drummond, who we talked about, damn near 60%. Korkmaz at about half of lineups. Portis, Giannis, McCollum, all north of 30, 35%. Damian Lillard checking in right now at just about 20%.
Hey, it's a 20 to 25. Okay.
Yeah. So that's where the estimate stands at him approaching that game. Let's go to the Clippers side, because obviously we are running out of time here, and there are Sims on the way for people to be watching starting about 8 minutes. So Paul George obviously is the most expensive play. He is going to be seemingly the best play in terms of fantasy point production for this Clippers team. Doesn't mean he's the best value play or even the best points per dollar play, something like that. To me, Reggie Jackson, who obviously Garion talked a lot about, is a better play at, severe discount, $4,200 cheaper than Paul George. You go down Eric Bledsoe, even another $2,000 cheaper than that, is in a solid spot tonight. So Garion, anyone on the Clipper side that we've not yet focused on that you like?
No, I mean, like Chirag talked about Reggie. I think I'm in a place where you can just find value with either Man or Batum. I know a lot of my builds, I'm sort of staring at $5,500 remaining in salary with a forward spot open. And I'm like, okay, Man or Batum, because really they project very, very similar. I think I would lean Batum. He's gone over 30 DraftKings points 3 of his last 4 games. He just is a little bit more of a creator. He's someone who could end up with a couple assists, a couple steals. He's usually good for over 5 rebounds. And, he's playing around 30 minutes a night. And this game should be competitive. I don't really feel like it's going to be a blowout where we're seeing the Clippers bench for the entirety of the fourth quarter or anything like that. So I think Batum is in a pretty good spot.
Logan asks in the chat here, Bucks, Blazers, Hawks all winning tonight. What do you think, Chirag?
Bucks, Blazers, and Hawks. No, I do not believe that that's possible. I think Utah takes care of business. This is one of the best teams in the league. Atlanta is really struggling, playing on the second night of back-to-back traveling to Utah. I don't think that that's a viable scenario. So that's the Hawks just take it out for me. And then Portland and the Clippers, this spread indicates that the Clippers are 2.5-point favorites. So basically what you're saying is that you're just giving them home court advantage and it's a coin flip after that. So, I mean, I think at a coin flip, I could side with Portland easily seeing Damian Lillard going off.
That guy should parlay that. That would probably pay out about like plus 550. So
there you go.
Just if you want to make sure you're not wrong or you missed an opportunity, throw $10 on that because you're going to get a nice number.
Chirag mentioned it, Garion, 2.5-point favorites. The Clippers at home, 221 is that total. So it's just a hair less than the last game that we were talking about. What are you looking for here for this one from a sports betting standpoint? Any props, player props that you like as well?
I'm leaning the over on this one. You've got two teams that have not been good at hitting the over so far this season, but like I said, I think Dame's showing signs of life. I think Covington is rounding into form. I just think the Blazers offense is set to be better the next little bit than it has been the first 3 weeks of the season. The Clippers, if they're going to score efficiently, you kind of need Paul George to have an efficient night, but he's been really good so far this season. So I've got some faith in that. These teams are also both ranking inside the top 10 in pace so far this season. So it should be a pretty up-tempo game. All
right. So we're going to get out of here in a couple moments here, but real quick, parting thoughts from the two of you guys. Chirag, we'll start with you. Again, bigger picture thoughts on this slate and just for giggles, a favorite fantasy play. I don't care about the price range.
I just believe Giannis is going to drop another 60 or 70 fantasy points tonight. I just think that there's just too much upside here. This team needs to right the ship. And this is a 2-time MVP, a defensive player of the year, going to be guarded against Andre Drummond. I mean, Bobby Portis, he can start at center as well, but there's no depth here for the Sixers. I just think that Giannis is going to flex his muscles and just absolutely demolish this game.
67 just what was it, 2 days ago in that game in Washington.
And if you look at the stats too, he didn't shoot particularly well. Yeah, it was 12 for 26, but he's a guy that is usually really close to the basket, and most nights he's shooting over 50%. So
that 0 for 4 from 3 that did him in.
Yeah. So if Drummond gets into foul trouble or anything opens up, it just sets up for a scenario where he could just break the slate.
What about you, Garion? Favorite play tonight, and just again, any big picture thoughts on the slate?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote up this slate at like 9 a.m. and I never even mentioned Damian Lillard, and somehow now I've talked myself into loving Damian Lillard to the point where I'm gonna probably be pretty overweight on Damian Lillard tonight, just hoping for that breakout. So, Blazers fans, Rip City, I'm with you tonight. We're gonna be watching all of Dame Lillard shots, and hopefully we get Dame time for 4 quarters tonight.
Well, guys, we thought, and it's my fault for getting so expansive with these two fellas. We thought maybe we'd get into some NBA futures and win totals and awards and stuff like that. We ran out of time. We went super deep dive on all 3 of these games and of course, Jokic Morris wars as well. But we thank you for joining us. Remember, the slate comes your way Monday through Friday after the 4 o'clock Madden Sim, so right around 5:15 Eastern time. Typically, as much as I rib him, it is Brendan Glasheen in the seat on Tuesdays. We made a little switch, so you'll have me this week, today and Thursday. Glash will be with you again on Friday, so stay tuned for that, obviously, and we'll see what kind of trouble Bukes gives him later in the week. But Gary and Chirag, it's been too long. A pleasure hanging out with you guys.
Appreciate it.
Fun, man.
Thanks to Eamon, our producer, T Pike, undercover boss Tom, our technical director. Best of luck, everybody. Remember, lineups locking in about an hour and a half. So get to it, start building in just a little bit. Enjoy the games. We'll see you later.